Hey everybody, it's Paul Grossman, the Dark Arts Wizard of Test Automation, and welcome to yet another Zapple Tech Gathering where we get together the most brilliant and beautiful minds of the test automation field, working in testing software, and all sorts of cool stuff. This is going to be a 2-hour session as usual. We have two wonderful guests. Now, coming up in an hour, we have Ezanne Grobler, who is going to be talking about test metrics. I always love metrics. If you get it right, you get it right. If you get it wrong, it's just a big mess. And she's going to be talking about good, bad, and ugly metrics. However, we do have up front over here in just a few minutes, we're going to have Tracy coming up. He's with the Happily on Consulting. He's been a Scrum Master, and I'm really excited to have him on board to give his presentation on Tidy Tester Guide to Automation. Tidy Tester Guide to Automation. I got a little bit of tongue twister going on here. As I mentioned, I'm Paul Grossman, the Dark Arts Wizard. Now, you might be sitting there going, hey, wait a second. Every other month, we get Larry Goddard over here. And if you don't know, Larry Goddard and I actually wrote a book on test automation called WebDriver, Enhancing Test Automation for WebDriver over there. Larry is out with a family event, a very happy family event out in Trinidad today. So I get to step in and have more fun with our guests who are out on here. One of the things I do like to tell you in test automation, there are tons of different tools that are available out there that you can do. One of them is a company that I help work with. It is called TestRigger, and they do test automation with plain English, no expat, no CSS, and they even have plain English. If you can type the words click, add to cart, you could be an automation team member on here. You don't have to learn any code. No more plugging for that, but I do want to plug this other thing. Joe Colantonio has the Automation Awesomeness book that has just been released. Go check that out. And you know what? One more thing over here, the Complete Software Tester. This is by Kristen Chikvani, and she's actually with a company called Paylocity, right down the street from me. Do check both of those guys out. Those are fantastic books. I always like to give a little prep and promotion for that because it's great to have the stuff and have the knowledge in there. Take the time to sit down and read and listen to what you've got from the brilliant minds. I'm not one of the brilliant minds. I'm close, but it's only because I hang around and I kind of rubs off. But I like to have a little bit of fun, as you can tell from my shirt. Monday morning, hey, I'm on vacation, man. Just a little reminder, you can ask questions of our guests live. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. On our LinkedIn, if you're watching from the LinkedIn stream, you can ask questions. They will appear up on my side over here, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end when we bring Rick and Ezanne on over here. And the other thing is, if you're watching through the YouTube channel, the YouTube link, you can ask questions over there as well. We do recommend do it from the LinkedIn one over here. You'll see it coming in through on the side. It's a little bit easier for me, but I will be bouncing back and forth through that. It is the week of Halloween, so I hope you guys are going to have a lot of fun and dress up and get a lot of candy. let's see, I'm on a sidetrack now. So let's get right back on track over here. As I mentioned, we have Rick Tracy. If we could pull Rick up on our screen, because I think I've covered all the
Hey,
things I wanted to do here. Hey, Rick, how you
hello.
doing?
Oh, pretty
Hey,
good.
cool.
I lost a bit of my voice last week, so I'm glad it's back.
Who are you screaming at? Don't do that.
Oh, too many people, too many people.
Too many. All right, cool. Rick, I know that you have been a Scrum Master. You work for Hepleon Consulting. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm what I call a process optimizer. I go into different companies and I help them make things run a little bit better. Usually test related, but often enough it can also be an organizational question or a communication question. Um, and I do that either just by myself, go through, enable people, or I come and I bring a team and we sort some things out, set up some test automation, set up some good quality gates, or simply just help people to learn a little easier.
Perfect. Well, with that said, I would say let's do the one final check we get to do. I do know your mic is working very well, so that's cool.
Wonderful.
Uh, do you have a share screen, a PowerPoint, or any
Yep,
demo?
I will
Cool.
pull that up.
And then with that final check, I will let you run. Let's see if I can see the secondary screen come up. I can
Are
talk
we
to
on
our.
there?
Yeah, I can see it right
All
over there. Rick, it is all yours. Take it away.
right. All right. So, as I said, bear with me here. I just got my voice back, so we'll see if it holds. I really hope it does. Um, I wanted to talk to you all today. Welcome, by the way. I want to talk to you today about automation, and specifically, I want to talk to you about what I call the Tidy Tester Guide to Automation. Now, what do I mean by that? About 10, maybe even 15 years ago now, somebody came out with this book called The Joy of Cleaning Up. And if you know Marie Kondo, if you know that name, then you've probably already experienced a little bit of the philosophies that I'm going to lay out here. But what it comes down to is that we all have this mess going on, and we all want it to not be messy anymore. And the same is true for test automation. One of the reasons why this happens is because we don't do the context and the surrounding preparation for automation that we should if we really want to get it to run well. So in this guide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we can avoid those pitfalls, what things to look for, how to make sure that you have everything set up that you need to have set up so that you can have a successful automation project. So let me pop over there. Contents, some things we're going to talk about today. There's a couple things you really need to think about before you start. If you don't do these things, it's probably going to give you a lot of issues down the line. Then we're going to talk about how do you initiate an automation project rather than just be automating certain things. How do you make sure you get a good grip on the scope of things? After that, we're going to talk about how you map the processes, the things you're actually trying to take a look at automating. And inherent in that is controlling environments, making sure that the environments you're doing the work in actually work the way they want them to and give you the results that you're looking for, or at least give you results you can trust. Then we're finally actually going to talk about building the automation. All that stuff happens before, and what kind of tips and tricks you can do while building it up to avoid problems in the future. And then we're going to talk a little bit how you measure the progress of automation, because it's not just doing it, it's also showing other people that it's being done. That provides some value there. Lastly, we're going to focus very much about cleaning up automation and avoiding those pitfalls I talked about. And that's just going to talk about refinements and how we can have some tips and tricks that makes your automation a little cleaner, a little bit neater, puts it in its place. So with no further ado, before you start, there's a couple questions that you need to ask yourself before you start doing test automation. And one of the biggest ones, and what might surprise you, one of the ones that fails the most is this one. What is your test process? If somebody asks me to come in and set up a test automation system for them, and I ask them, what is your test process? And they can't answer, that's a red flag right there. It's just a pure stop. If you don't know what your test process is, if you don't even know how you're doing it manually, there's no way I'm going to successfully automate it, because I'm not sure what I'm automating if you don't actually have one. So it's important when you look at this to be able to describe your test process simply. And one of the exercises we use for that is called the Post-it exercise. With the Post-it note exercise, we ask people to explain or describe their entire test process on just one tiny little Post-it note. And yeah, that's not always easy for people. So the questions we ask them, what kind of things would you focus on? What's most important to get across? And then what would you want that person to know? What is it you want them to walk away with after you? In essence, it's a little bit difficult to get it all boiled down for most people. But if you ask people, if you kind of push on a little bit, most people will know what it is they're actually looking for in their test process. And that makes it a lot easier to figure out what the results of automation should be. What do they actually want to be helped with? Is it just that they want the test to go faster, or are they looking for something more stable? Things like that. So the first exercise is, what is your test process, and can you describe it? Is it something you can describe in your post? Then you've got the question, who's involved in the test process? Some people just say, yeah, the testers are involved in the test process. But obviously, that's not all the people we're going to be dealing with when we're talking about test automation or even testing itself. We've got who's going to design the testing, the test process, the test automation. Who's going to build it? Is it the same person? Do your test analysts have the same skills as your test engineers? Do you even have a separation between them? Oh, you guys are.
Is there the PowerPoint getting stuck on you over there?
Yeah, I've got a. Yeah, no, I've got your speech from earlier playing through the session right now. I'm not sure why.
I don't hear it on my end. Is it possible you've got two tabs open and you've got the other session kind of playing on it? No, on that. All right, let me see what I can do. I'm going to go.
I think I got it.
You do? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I'm here to help. That's all. That's what we do. It happens. It happens. Do want to let you know, Rick? When you get a little quieter, there's a little bit of audio dropout. So I would say just keep the voice up a little bit. But I think we're good to go. I'll be hanging around.
Okay. Sorry about that. No problem. We were trying to set up some streaming on the other one. Okay. So fixed it on this side. Some things to think about when you're thinking about the players. You have to think about people not always being the same people. So who will design it and who will build it are not always the same people. On top of that, you're also going to be taking a look at who's going to be using it. Is this a test automation that you're designing for a group, for a team, for a user group, for example, so that they can use UAT quicker? And if so, are they also going to be the ones executing it? Or is that, again, a different group of people? Or is that somebody who's also designing it? And then, in the end, who's going to need to see the results? And what do they need? What are their quality criteria? What are the results that they can understand? And of course, and this one gets forgotten a lot, who will maintain your test automation? Once you've made it, where does it go? Does everybody create their own thing? Is there a central structure? Is there some kind of maintenance plan in place? Is there somebody who has that in their portfolio? So it's not necessarily that you need a different person for all these different roles, but it's important to know whose portfolio this is. Asking one person to have all of this, that's not realistic. You're going to be doing a back and forth with people during the automation. So before you even start, you should know who's involved. You should also know how much of your test process you control. Now, this is one of the more sensitive topics because a lot of people who are running a test automation project won't have environmental control, for example. They won't be able to determine whether they have their own separate test environment or who gets on it or configuration of it. Several of them will not have an easy way to import data from production and to anonymize that data and make sure it's usable. So there's a lot of parts to this where you don't necessarily automatically control your own test process. So then you have to look at things like, do you have a dedicated test environment? Or do you share this environment with multiple teams, even if it's dedicated? Is it just yours, or is it also with other people? And is it a central hub, or is it a loose container that's spun up every time? And each of those things can make a big impact on what kind of automation you're going to set. Do you have production-like data? Is it data you can trust? Is it data that's going to give you a result that you can trust? Or is it always going to be a separate data set that you have to hand create? Again, that will impact how you create your automation and where you pick up data. Is that data recent? Is it something that's going to reflect the questions somebody has when they want to use your automation? Or is it just going to work one time, in which case you built a very fancy system to answer a single question? So you have to think about, does your data actually reflect the risks that are coming up? Or is it data that was used in the past that originally gave you some results but might not show anything now? That's important to take a look at. What parts of this do you control, and what parts of it do you still need to do some things and work with other people on? Again, going back to people. Another important question before you start is, do you have a specific tech that's needed in order to test? And these can be things like specific tool sets, but it can also be things like connections and interfaces with other people, with other systems. So the questions here are your connections live in your test environment, or are they simulated? Is there a risk in simulating them? Might you maybe give a false positive if you do so in automation? And what kind of tools are involved? Are they involved just in automation, or are they involved in your manual testing? And do you have your tests interface with anyone else's tests? Is it a series of chain tests? Or does any of your test data need to be passed on? What happens if you do an automated test where you mutate your test data? Does that affect somebody down the line? These are all things that you should think about as part of your design before you even get started building it. Because in essence, you could end up building, again, a really neat system, but that only works for you. And later, it'll get messy. And lastly, the important question to ask before you start is, why are you automating? What is the purpose behind your automation strategy? Is it just money? Is it just the fact that with a little bit of investment and tooling, you can pull bugs back up from users finding them in tests and find them in tests and thus reduce the cost? Because that's a pretty basic argument that we get a lot of times from the business. We want to save money. We want to find issues earlier. We want to do it faster. So the other one is time. Are we running the same tests over and over? That to me is a good time argument for automating because, well, return on investment is pretty high. But are we just running this test once and it takes a long time? Well, then it might not be as good to automate. Maybe we should just do it and leave it be. So the question then becomes, again, why are you automating? Is it money? Is it time? Are you trying to simplify? Is it a complicated test that needs to be done right every time? Is it a consolidation of a bunch of tests that are done every time all over the system? All of these are good reasons to automate, but you need to know what yours is. If you don't know why you're building it, then I'd say stop, figure that out, and get back to it, because you don't know if you've been successful if you don't know why you're doing it. So be sure you know why you're automating before you start. Okay, so knowing why is key to your design. You can build your test automation to answer whatever need that you have, and here's a controversial thing, feel free to ignore the best practices that interfere with that need. There's a lot of experts out here who will tell you exactly how you can do test automation, but it's all based on a different need. It's all based on a different question that the person has for why you're automating. So sometimes you might want to let go of some good advice if it's going to help you get what you need. Don't be held back by that just because people say that's the best thing to do, if it's interfering with your ability to get your goal. Always know that your goal is more important than the standard. So even the advice I'm going to give you here in this talk, some parts, feel free to ignore it if you feel that it's not going to be useful. But better yet, give me a call, write me a message, and let's debate it. Let's talk about it. So when you're starting an automation project, there's a couple golden rules. The first one is don't dabble, commit. I know people like to experiment with the idea of automating, but if you're actually going to automate, don't leave it half done. If you're going to go for it, go for it. But when you go for it, commit to small pieces of functionality. Don't commit to this huge thing that you're going to do and then no longer talk about it or share it with anybody until you're done. You want to be agile with automation. You want to be sure that you can show how this gets delivered, how this is delivering value each step of the way. But you also want to keep it very structured. At some point, you're going to want to stop doing automation. You're going to want to stop doing the main building phase of automation in any case. And so keeping it structured allows you to see what value you've already delivered and where you're going with it to make a good decision about when to stop or when to pause or even when to continue again after that. So the three rules again: Don't just dabble, commit, but commit to small things you can deliver in intervals, and keep it structured so that people can see what's going on and that you can keep track of it as well. In that way, it's good to have a project roadmap. And in the roadmap, there's 4 steps. You create awareness, first of all. Then you set up a framework. Then you automate, configure, integrate, and measure. And lastly, you connect. And by connect, I mean you're connecting the automation to your other software development practices. How this works. At first, you create awareness. Per team, per system, whatever you have, you create a system map. If it doesn't already exist, this is the time to make it. Because again, you need to know what it does and what kind of impacts it has to the system, to the function. Those are 2 levels deep. You can go even deeper to the code if you're really ambitious. But you want to be able to use that to define what kind of processes that you're actually going to be automating. And seriously, do define them, categorize them. Talk about, are these business processes? Are these systematic processes? Are these test processes specifically that we're looking at? And when you do that, you can kind of not only create awareness for yourself on what you're working on, but you can also show other people the scope on which you're working. And sometimes they'll come with ideas of, oh, maybe you could look at that. Here's a big risk. Here's a big value. Can we maybe automate that as well? The second part is the automate, configure, integrate, and measure step. Here you want to be sure that you're prioritizing the things that are high value for automation. In my opinion, it's best to prioritize existing processes and items that you already know are repeatable, that already are there, simply because there's a low-hanging fruit. It's really easy to do. And that gives you immediate value. You also want to make sure that any tools or methods that you're using have been configured for your use. Most things, even when they say they work right out of the box, need a little tweaking. So be sure to get that set up before you go on in and start building. Once you've started that, then you've got to integrate automation, not just into the testing process itself, but into the whole flow of your software development. So if somebody requests a change, that change should also trigger an automation change, because that may impact how you're going to test it, or at least an automation review. And lastly, you want to be able to measure your impact and value of all of these things above and adjust accordingly. So if you notice that value is starting to lack, or if you notice that the impact is not the impact that you wanted, then you have the ability to objectively say this is or isn't working. And lastly, you need to connect. So how do you connect it? Well, it starts with creating interdependent automation streams. Developers, when they're working on automation, they typically keep that fairly autonomous. It's for the unit test. They make sure that that works for them, for the tests they're doing. But with test, it gets a little mixed. Because here, based on the impact, you might actually connect it with a business process or with a UX testing process or something further. And especially when you get to acceptance tests, that's when you're really going to be integrating people's everyday processing with the system functionality maps that you may have made in the past. Any reporting you do on this should be based on the system impact and the scope of the test. That way you keep people a little limited to what it is that they're actually trying to find out. And when you're running full chain tests, be sure to do that prior to doing major deployments, but it doesn't mean you have to do it every single time before any deployments. I will, however, later suggest to do a continuous chain test in order to address this problem in general. As part of the whole automation scope, you should have a good architectural overview. That means per domain, you should know your systems, your processes, and your components. This isn't something you have to do yourself. There are architectural specialists, there are process mappers, there's all kinds of people who do this professionally. Just make sure that there's a generally good idea of what these are so that you can add your testing processes to the UX experience, the business processes, to any tools that exist and their configurations, and that all the involved teams are also a part of this map. You don't want to be an automation stream set apart from the process. You want this to be another part of the architecture of the system. Now you've got setting up frameworks. And setting up frameworks is probably the one that people are most familiar with when they're trained on automation frameworks or things like that. And the first thing you have to do is to establish the value of that process automation. And that's when you set up your return on investment. If I'm going to build in this framework, how much time is that going to cost? How much knowledge will I have to gain to do this, and how much knowledge will I gain once I've done this? And can I simplify it, and is there a way to standardize it? That gives you a general framework for how to do your automation. Once you've done that, you can set up a prioritized backlog for the components of that framework, and then choose a method and tool for automating. But this just gives you the general framework in which you can build, and that has to be a part of your roadmap. Again, all of this is done prior to you actually building your first script on there. So as you can see, it's quite a lot of context. That means that automation often comes in phases, automation projects. In the first phase, you generally do pilot projects, you do core functionality, and you take a look at dashboards. How can you make sure that people can have insight into what you're actually making and what you're delivering? After that, once you've established some system awareness and built the fundamentals, then you can engage business processes, connect the users to the automation, and then roll out and integrate to all teams once you've got a comfortable feel for how you're doing the automation. And phase 5, of course, is continuing to maintain, refine, and report results. Now, all of that just paints the picture for how a project is set up for doing automation. But it's important that we understand what we actually do in an automation project, because we're not just scripting. We're establishing awareness of the process. That's valuable for everybody. We establish the fundamentals for automation. That's valuable for testing in general. You improve your testing by doing so. You're creating and selecting tools that'll help. You're configuring that tool. You're selecting the components that you're automating, and also sometimes importantly, selecting the ones you're not automating. And then you're integrating those into that software development flow like we talked about. In the end, we're also measuring the impact and applying that automation to any further systems that might be useful to do so. And in essence, what we end up doing is we standardize those common processes and verifications to report simply and to go through quality gates based on the criteria that we want to have. So we don't lose sight of the fact that all of this is supposed to support testing by standardizing in this case, or by making a process easier. Part of that means you're going to be mapping your test processes. And that means you're going to learn a lot more about how you test. Now, a lot of people, when they start doing automation, like, I know the tests, I know what I'm doing, I know what we've tested. But it might surprise you to learn how few things are as repeatable as you think. And that's largely because we use our tests differently each time. Even people who have a set of test sets that they've already written will occasionally select one, occasionally select the other. But it's much different from having a set toolkit. So my suggestion would be, when you start doing this, make sure you've mapped your test process to the point where you know, I use this test to figure this thing out. I use this test to address that risk. I use this test on this function. And do a bit of pre-sorting to learn how effective each one of them are. In the end, you might end up throwing away a couple tests that you have in your toolkit because they're either not suitable for automation or because they're not as effective as a different test that you've thought of. But you first need to have a good idea of what you actually have. Sorry, I always share this picture to say what's easier to organize. So most people will obviously point to the one on the right, that once it's nice and easy to see, it's a lot easier to organize, it's a lot easier to work with. And that's the same with your testing. If you're just approaching test automation as, oh, I do some testing and I got to automate it, you're working with the image on the left because you have a bunch of tests, but they're not organized in any way. If you've set them up, if you've organized them in the roadmap in the way I've shown just past here, it'll be a lot easier because now you just have to select each area and figure out where you're going to plug them in. And part of that is by making categories. And you can make categories for testing in a lot of different ways. A couple of ones I suggest are, take a look for processes that already have scripts. Maybe it's a kickoff script, an execution script, a process script, and see if you can hang a test on there. Just somewhere in the code, you add verify value this. And that's how you can use you can categorize that test as, this is a process with scripts. You can also take a look at steps that are repeated. File transfers, logins, that's one of the most common ones, or any kind of steps that has you doing a similar or same function in your system. Put them in the same category. You can also take a look at regression validations. Most of the time, people have at least a small set of things that they always check before they go live to make sure that the system hasn't lost value when you go live. And having that set is a great basis to start with when you're doing automation. For one, those are easy to automate. And for another, They're clearly things you've thought of beforehand. This is something that we have decided we want to test every time. So why not? Let's automate that. Lastly, it's important not to ignore background functionality. There are quite a few things in the system that are running fine until they're not. So it's important to know what kind of tests you have that take a look at what might go wrong and keep those in their own category as well. There are many other categories. This is just a way to get started on thinking about them. That said, it's important to understand the difference between doing a validation and a test. The way I always explain it to people, a validation is if you know the value of what you want beforehand. So in that case, you're looking for an output of 10, and it either is 10 or it isn't 10. Whereas a test is a risk. You're worried about a risk that could present in different ways, and you're trying to figure out what is presented. That is a test because we don't know the outcome. We are not expecting a certain thing at the end. We're just testing for behavior. So when I use terminology like validations and tests, this is what I'm referring to. A validation, regression tests are very famous as validations because we have a previous setting that we know is valuable, and we have a new setting that we don't know what it's going to be, and we can compare it. That's a validation. But you can also say, if we don't know the impact that's going to come out of it, then the test, that run itself is actually a test because we're worried about a risk to a certain part of the function. Tests are harder to automate, but it's not impossible to automate. So when people say you can only automate validations, I don't think that's true. You can also automate tests because you basically set it up to open the data up for exploration. There are 4 distinct whys of validation. Why do we do validation? Well, the first one, obviously, to test if something is functional. The second, to learn something in general by taking a snapshot. We have, at this point, seen this is what it looks like. And then we can do tests on what that means. It's also important to check for edge cases because sometimes things will fall between the cracks, something we didn't think of, something maybe only one user out of 100 will do. But those are also good things to validate for. And lastly, the emotional part. It's good to do validations to avoid disappointment. And so when you automate, you also want to be sure which one of these validations are you currently automating with. If at some point you come across something and there's no risk and you're not really sure why you're testing it, throw it away. Because everything that you automate has to be worth the time you put into automating. Don't just automate it because it's there. Make sure you understand why it's there. If you can't tell what risk it's covering, if nobody knows what risk it's covering, if you don't even know why you're doing it, just throw it away. Don't use a test that you don't know what you're trying to answer. And the same with automation. Don't automate a test that you don't know what it's supposed to do. It's just going to be a waste of your time. So that's pre-clearing the junk. Once you've done all that, you can take a look at those environments. And as I said before, you've got to ask yourself the questions about your data and your environments and whether they all have the things you need. But once you've done that, make sure you have a plan to use the environment. Know what you want to use it for, what you don't want to use it for. Have a profile for people using that environment. What kind of people are using it? What are they using it for? Make sure that it connects with certain data sets. So have those pre-selected as well. Because automation, above all things, requires stability. If you don't have a stable environment, you can't trust the results from the test in general, but you also won't be able to trust that your automation is going to run right. Automation does require the environment to be the way that you designed it to be, or, well, you will have successfully found something, but you'll have found an issue in your environment, not necessarily in your code. And that can take up a lot of time. In my experience, it ends up taking a good chunk of time if you haven't done the preparation, just fixing the environmental problems. And that's a waste that most people don't want to experience. So make sure you tackle that ahead of time. Know what you're using the environment for. Know how far that control extends. Also very important in this part is building reset scripts. If you're so lucky as to do a back office automation, like I did in this project, for example, then it's very simple to just delete everything that you had on there and then insert it from a backup table and make sure that you have everything set up the way that you want it to. Reset scripts can be a real time saver and make sure that everything that you test is trustable, that you can trust that the results that came from it are accurate. Because every single time you're going to reset it and run it again, and reset it and run it again. This is something I use a lot for continuous regression tests, for example, mainly because I never have to worry that something I did in a previous test is going to mess up the test I did now. Reset scripts, if they're useful for your particular automation, I highly recommend building those and spending a good time making sure they're good quality. In terms of data sets, it's good to have multiple data sets for different use cases. I know a lot of people just have a single data set, a representative data set from production, but you also want to make sure you have a couple ready to throw through an automated stream if you're looking for something specific, a specific customer type, a specific functional path, or anything that you think it needs its own test category, what we established ahead of time. But make sure they do stay up to date. I had one that people were using in 2018 that was from 2006, and that did not work as well. So just because you made it once doesn't mean that's all you have to do. You have to maintain it, make sure it's up to date. Okay, that's a lot of prep work. So all of that is very important to do before you even start to build up automation. And even though you're ready to build, there's still some choices that you have to make. The first one you have to make is which of the two approaches, the main two approaches to automation you're going to do. The first one is you automate all the things that have the most value to your system delivery. And this means that you take a look at what are the processes that can't go wrong. What are the tests that you really don't want to have fail on a test level? And that's where you focus your automation. You make sure that they're stable, that you have the right data, the right environment, the right tests. You're always going to find the information you want for the most valuable deliveries. That is a very valid and very good approach. And then there's another approach that's also good and valuable, and that's automate all the simple validations. You can do both of these, but you have to start with one. If you try to do both at the same time, you're going to get messy because you're going to start automating a couple of the very difficult but highly valuable things and then see some simple validations that will distract you. Or you'll be doing a lot of those, but then you'll be like, oh no, I really should work on the other one. It's important to pick a focus where you start. After you've been doing it for a while, then you can switch over to the other. But again, this is about committing. Commit to one of these two approaches. It'll make your automation process a lot simpler. The second question you have to ask is, are you doing process automation or are you doing test automation? So what I'm saying here is, are you automating the processes to make it easier to do manual testing? So am I running the system through, running all the data from beginning to end, and then taking a look at the data myself manually? Or am I automating the tests so that I can process everything easier? Am I executing it maybe still even by hand, and then having a bunch of data analysis scripts running through everything to make sure that all my validations are good and giving signals if something is not the way that I would expect or is just to do general information? These are two distinct things, and a lot of times somebody thinks they're doing test automation and they're actually doing process automation. I've seen people build up incredible test automation suites when all they're really doing is automating the process that a user does when they're running through their process. It's not the same thing. Both are valuable and both can be used, but make sure you know which one that you're currently picking. There are four main rules for starting automation for testing. The first one, I've said it before, if there's no test process, you're not doing any test automation. Just don't. It's too messy. If you do start down that path, I guarantee you, it's just going to be you looping back around again. Make sure you have a test process. Second thing is, don't obsess about how it looks when it's done. A lot of people like to have these brilliant looking frameworks with every single thing built up. That's not really the most value you're going to get out of the automation. It looks nice, it looks tidy, but that doesn't mean it's actually giving you the value. So focus more on what you're trying to achieve, how it feels when you're done. What do you feel about your tests once they're automated? Do you feel more trusting? Do you feel that your tests are more valuable? Do you feel that it saved you time? That's more important than the way that it looks all nice and organized and wrapped in a bow. The third rule is don't invite others, and by others I mean people outside the automation project, to automate with you when you start. We like to do knowledge sharing sessions. We think I'll just pull this person in from this project, this person from this project, we'll learn together. In essence, the more people who don't know as much about you as your system who are helping you, the more clutter you're going to leave behind. You're going to be much more effective when you're, and by you I mean maybe not just yourself, but your team, are searching through the most vital things and making sure those things are getting automated and those things are getting attention, rather than some of the things other people might think look cool. So don't immediately start with the organization-wide grab. Start focused in your team. That's a big part of the last one is don't go too big in your first approach. Don't try to automate everything all at once, but be the example for your team, for your system, for your department, whatever that scope is for you. Be that example, and then once it's established, then go for the big approach. This one basically means put a rein on your manager and say, whoa, hold on there. Let's make sure this is valuable and that you can see the value in this and that we know we're spending our time wisely. When you start, it's important to make an organized backlog. Just like any project, you want to have something that you can continue to work on. Don't start working on anything as far as like pure coding scripting that you can't finish in a day or two. Because at the beginning, what you want to do is quick, modular, functional scripts, things that are simple, things that are easy to translate and pick over. You don't want to pick up a big 21-point item and start automating that thing, just pieces. If you need to break it down, break it down. Break it down until they're tiny little pieces. Eventually, you'll be able to put these all together into nice, it's like using Lego blocks. You'll be able to put them together into nice functional blocks. I would suggest that you don't pick your favorite test first. And two big reasons for that is one, you're not practiced at it yet. So your favorite test might end up failing a lot, and that might make them no longer your favorite tests. And the second thing is, if you like doing the test so much, maybe that's not the first one to automate. Automate the other stuff and keep doing the fun things, the ones you like to do. It's also important because the other things are usually low-hanging fruit. They're repeated tests with simple outcomes. Those are the ones that you can grab really easily for quick value. They're also the ones that give you the best practice because you're going to be more or less successful with those right off the bat. And as you make simple mistakes, you'll avoid bigger mistakes in the future. The bigger the functions are, the more pieces you're going to have. So make sure that you kind of focus on those small ones. You started off, but now you want to measure it because, well, this might take a long time, especially if you're breaking it down into tiny little pieces. So as you're building, it's important that you can report to people what you're building, how you're building it, and maybe even showcase it a little bit. That doesn't mean that you're going to show them the automation stream. Half the time, it won't be running right unless you've built all those little modular components. So showing them individual functions bit by bit, that can be a bit disheartening. But there is an easy way to show people the progress, and that's by showing them the bigger picture and where you're filling things in. So I usually use 4 different components for that. There's the fundamentals, the configuration, the components, and the integration. And each of these, I show in how far automation is meeting the goals for these areas. So fundamentals, how far is automation meeting the goals set in our test strategy? How far is it meeting the goal of our automation strategy that we built off of that? And how much of that process preparation have we done in order to actually go for our automation? That should be fully full by the time we actually start building, for example. In configuration, we're taking a look at our general, our maintained, our optimal, and our potential areas. It's an important thing to know that your general configurations are things like what runs in your process normally without any interference. Your maintained configurations is what things do you have to actively change in order for your test to run. Your optimal ones are obviously the goals that you want to have at the end, and your potential ones, the ones here, those are the most important ones to have when you're talking about what we're gaining from automation. So if you can make goals out of these and measures, then that's where you put that in. Components is actually one of the simpler ones. It simply counts how many components are in your system and does a percentage for how many of those are automated. That doesn't mean that you're going to do 100% component coverage. Set a goal beforehand of how much percent, and then you do a ratio of how far you are to get there. And lastly, integration. This is a bit more subjective, but it's something that I suggest you work with your Scrum Master on and figure out how much integration of that automation you've already built is a part of your software development cycle. As I mentioned earlier, one of the most fundamental ones is if a change comes up that's going to change the way your process works, does that trigger a change in your automation? Does that trigger a check to your automation? if a different value is added to potential business outcomes, does that change your automation? Is that integrated into your process? So these are, as I said, a bit more subjective, but if you set the goals up beforehand, you can easily show the progress in that. I use simple visualizations for this. No need to get too complex. You can set up really neat dashboards. I literally built this in Excel. What I do is I show in each of these areas how much we've done, and then I have usually a color code legend for this means somewhat, this means definitely, this means we haven't started. And then this can show people how far we are along the process. You can also see here, this is one I did for a project back in 2000, apparently 2029, that's a typo, 2019 and 2020, to show how our build was going versus our goal for the components getting automated here. These are just ways to make it simpler for other people to understand what you're doing without having to showcase each and every individual automation thing you've set up. Another way you can do that is to show the impact. Now, this one's pretty powerful if you have to keep on proving why we should continue the automation project. This one actually comes from one of those projects that I did, in which we showed that based on the previous recorded measurements of how long it took for these processes to be run and how much percentage of time that we got back, we could showcase that. We saw that on average, because of our changes, we saved 22 minutes every time that we would ordinarily run this test process by running it with our automation scripts. And that meant that we had a return on investment of 14 for every 1 minute we put into it. And that was done by taking a look at how much time we put into it. And those are just some neat ways to show that you actually are getting value out of the time you're putting into it. It can also show you sometimes that it takes a long time to win it back. You can have it be a reverse, where it takes you 14 minutes for every 1 minute that you saved, which means it has to be a test process that you do at least 14 times in order to break even. That's why I say it's important to know what you're automating. If you're automating things that are important but only happen once, it's very hard to get your return on investment for that. But if you're automating things that happen all the time, well, if you run it 100 times a day, it doesn't matter if you spend 100 minutes making that 1 minute save, you've already won it in a single day. The other thing you can do is you can talk up what it does from a test perspective. So the ones on the bottom here are things that I would report to a manager, for example. I'd say, well, we found there are multiple standard process bugs, things that were going wrong in the past because we were not testing it consistently. But now we find them because we test it consistently. And we have those standard measures established, and that allows us to set up an automated regression run, which means we don't have to manually do all these things anymore. And our test data creation was also greatly sped up because we automated that as well. And so you can showcase these particular things as a way of saying our automation isn't just about the little functionalities we're making, but the real impact it's having on our work, on other people's work, on our time. Once you've built that, once you've shared that, once everybody's happy with all your reports on it, it's time to refine. Because just because you built it once doesn't mean it stays fine. As you automate, you're going to make redundancies. You're going to build scripts that you've already built before, you forgot about it. And you're going to make mistakes, something that doesn't work the way you thought it would. Accept it. That's going to be a part of the process. But do plan to go back and refine regularly, because you're going to find these. Every time you go back over, you're going to find another thing. Oh, I could have done it that way. Oh, I've done it in 2 places the same. So refinement is a huge part of test automation and keeping it clean. And you can do that by thinking of a human versus a machine. So a human tends to test a certain way, and a machine tends to test a different way. One of the first tests that I did was to take a look at how somebody did a manual test versus how the automated script ran it. And anybody who's ever done UI testing will tell you that's a pretty clear distinction. Because while we might look visually for what's on there and pick it from the UI, it's faster for a test script to just pull up the command, from say a command prompt. And so why would we have it search through the UI if that's not the real test? If all we're doing is trying to execute the command, maybe we want the machine to just execute the command. And that's something the machine can do that the human can't. One of the examples that I always say is wait. So if I am doing a test and I'm running a process and I'm waiting for it to open, I am actively waiting because, well, it's supposed to open and, okay, there it is, it's opened. But a machine, it opens something and immediately looks for the next instruction. So if you tell a machine, okay, open this and then select this, it's going to try to select it. It's not going to be there because it's not open yet. And then it says, oh, I failed. And that's something you have to start thinking about. Oh, do I have to tell the machine to wait? Or do I have to tell the machine what to look for before you do the next instruction? How does the machine work versus how do I work? And that's part of refining it, making sure that your test script go from human to non-human. There's also modular construction. This is an example of something that I built in a testing tool. And I originally created a whole bunch of different functions all by themselves, and I linked them up together in this giant map of functionalities. Just everything was going all at once because that's the way I did it, manually. I would run this, then I'd run that, then I'd run that, then I'd run that, then I'd run that. That was my document. But I found that in my automation, that made it look extremely messy and very busy. So what I ended up doing was I created modular functions. I said, if you're going to read variables, then you're going to run this script right here. Doesn't matter what variables it was. I made it general. If you're going to launch the server, you're going to launch this process right here. I'm not going to put this in here after you've read the variable. I'm just going to say, go to this one. If you're going to select a particular folder location, use this function. If you're going to create new folders, use this function. And in essence, what I ended up doing is creating a program on top of a program by adding these different modular constructions together. That's why I say you're going to first build these things up, and then as you build these ones up, you're going to be able to build these larger scripts a lot easier. If you start with this, you're going to get a giant map with a lot of functions, and it's going to look very busy, and it's going to be really hard to refine. But if you keep on trying to cut them into smaller pieces and give them their own little functional map, then using those components will be a lot easier for modular construction. You can reuse them, you can make them more generalized rather than specific, and in the end, you can do a lot more with them. One of the things you can do with that is do true global consolidation. The one on the left is my original setup, and I had it reading every single line from an Excel document. Let's just say that took a long time to program in correctly and make sure that it was working. But once I did that, I realized that I didn't actually have to do that. I could just have it read a particular type and read that through to the document, to the information that I have in the system. So that's where this one came in. But then I realized I didn't even have to do that. I just had to have it loaded up entirely and put every single variable together with a variable I defined in another module. And because of that, I took this whole giant script here, threw it away, this whole thing, threw it away, and I ended up just with this. And that makes it a lot faster, a lot easier to use, and I can apply it to any Excel. I didn't have to specifically define which line, which value, what the name was going to be. I just had to make sure that there was a single point of execution, or a single point of maintenance, as I called it. And that was just that same Excel file. I just added a variable to it, this column right here. Still had the same values it was reading, but I put the variable in the Excel rather than the code. That was a manual step to make my automation a lot simpler, a lot easier. Being able to do this rather than this saved me, this took me so much more time. Just by adding a single column in here and adding that in manually, I was able to improve my test automation. So don't get caught up with everything needing to be automized. This can actually save you a heck of a lot of time to do it by hand. There's another funny story in that a colleague of mine was very excited about doing automation, and he decided that he wanted to automate the transfer from the local computer to the file server. And it took him 8 hours to do that. And he was very proud of his script. He said, look, press execute, it ran, it moved the file over. I said, okay, how long does it take you to do that normally? About 5 seconds. He opens the folder, he drags it over and does that. And then I asked him, how many times do you do this? I said, well, for this one, we actually only do it once every 3 months. And at that point, he kind of cottoned on to the idea that it was going to take years before we would ever get the return on value from what he built there. So sometimes a manual step, key to your good test automation, do a good manual step. On the other hand, there's manual steps that are very annoying to do all the time. This one, for example. the entering a password. A lot of times when we do our test automations, we always spin up a new environment each time, which means we have to log in each time. And just building, even if it's the very first automation thing you build, is a login automation, can save you so much time, even if you do the rest manually. Just to have it automatically log you into things, chef's kiss, one of the best ones to do. It's also a single point of maintenance. There is, of course, a question of security. You want to make sure you have a tool that anonymizes your password, or that you're using just a test password for it, because that can go bad really quickly in the security world. But do make sure that as much as possible, if you have any manual input, make it a single point. If you're worried about trying to create a very complicated structure in which you have to name everything, maybe make it manual. When it comes time to actually implement all these things, who's doing it? We talked about the players, who's going to be running it, who's going to be maintaining it. One of the most successful things I've seen in my experience is something called an integration quality team. And what this team does is they basically connect all the local testing streams to a single system stream and do a systems regression test. They then send those results back to the local teams and thus create a canal, stream, river, ocean approach, where the team builds their own thing in the canal, sends it into the stream for local testing, sends it to the river for the continuous testing, and then sets it live in the ocean. This construction creates a single point of truth for all the involved teams. But what it also does is it creates a single point of automation. If you can start your automation on an integration quality level, then you can use pieces of that for the individual systems. That way, you're always building towards something bigger. What I mentioned earlier is that if everybody's building their own automation and they try to put it together, sometimes it doesn't fit. If you have something like an IQ team, then you end up getting a system where everybody combines their code and their data, and then eventually also their automation scripts, and that the IQ team takes that in, works it over, refines it, makes it work together, and then sends it back to the team for review. And this becomes this feedback loop that consistently makes people aware of what's going on in the automation and aware of the results of the automated tests, but also allows them to reuse pieces of that automation in their individual project teams. So sometimes if people are really struggling to get their automation to align, I would suggest set up an integration quality team that helps them to keep it very well refined. Now, these aren't without their pitfalls. There's obviously always going to be problems in automation, and I'd like to go over a couple of the more common ones to make sure that we can avoid the heavy impacts in the future when you get started on this. So this is actually directly from a report that I made for a project, but it's so common that I've ended up just copy pasting it on pretty much everyone I've done. So the 5 most common pitfalls: there's a lack of official dedicated time to automate. It's just considered, oh yeah, do that on the side. That's not committing. You really have to have it be your own action. It has to be a separate thing. It can't just be something you do on the side. You need to take the time to do this well. You also need to include them in the regular sprint. This can't be a side project as an organization as well. You have to think in terms of the core, how can this work with everybody kind of being aware of it and knowing that the tester's time, maybe a developer's time, maybe a project manager's time is taken up on working on the automation. But that's just going to be part of what you do to provide value as a team. You also make sure that people are trained. It's great that we can all self-train and think about all the different ways we can do tooling or how we can automate with different methodologies, but official training really does help, especially when you're talking about using tools. So if you do have a tool, make sure you get trained in that tool. If there's a particular methodology you're using, make sure you get the space and the time to train in that. You should also understand that the complexity of the system is going to give you issues. So break it down as much as possible. Make sure you have your data flows. Do the prep that I said beforehand. You won't have that pitfall. And lastly, any partners that you need to do configuration to set things up for automation, for example, for prepping environments, those are things that you want to keep a careful eye on, because if you're dependent on them, then all your goals are going to be dependent on their delivery. So keep your eye on that. These are the 5 most common pitfalls. There's also other issues that can come up, where I talked a little bit about system complexity. We talked a little bit about time to automate. make sure that you're checking in and that the things you're automating are worth automating. You want to be sure that the roles for coordination are there, that people are keeping an eye on what's going on and who's doing what, and that the reports you're making are clear to people. You want to make sure that the environments are being used correctly, that they're being checked and maintained, sorry, that the fundamentals are not being missed, and that you have the time budgeted. All of these are issues that are worth exploring to make sure that they don't happen without you being aware of them. So again, this is kind of risk management to keep this in track. To summarize, before you automate, prepare. There's a lot of preparation that I talked about. I know it sounds like a lot, but trust me, it'll save you so much work in the end, and it's a lot less work than fixing it as you go. Become intimately knowledgeable with your tests. If you don't know what tests you're automating, you're going to run into trouble, and it's not going to be as fun. You also want to, quote, kill your darlings. These are tests that may have been around for a long time. You have no idea why they're there. They don't help you. They don't tell you anything. Get rid of them. Control your environment if you can. Otherwise, make sure you are well connected with the people who do control your environment. Make sure that you can trust that what it produces is something you trust as a test result. Build with long-term plans, but with short-term goals, with short-term delivery times. Make sure that you can feel that momentum by continuing to deliver small pieces of the functionality and then build them together into larger chains. Showcase your work. Make sure people know what you're doing, how far you're getting, so that it doesn't just look like you're off in a cave building some wondrous machine you'll show in 3 years. Showcase what you're doing now. Make sure you refine the work that you're doing, both during and after your project. Keep coming back to it. And beware of the common problems and common organization problems that get in your way. That would be my biggest advice for keeping your testing clean, for keeping it going effectively, and to continue going forward. One last thing before I end, I don't want you to forget that automation is one of the investments in testing. And while it does affect a lot of the others, all the other things also affect automation. So if you invest in skill, in static knowledge, in awareness, in risk management, in alignment, and in the fundamentals of testing, it's also going to boost your automation. So as much as I can get excited about this topic, don't forget to think about the other things because they'll help you go faster, stronger, and make better test automation. Thank you.
All right. Rick, thank you very much for that informative session. And I just had like one question about I wanted to follow up in just a few seconds. And then we would also like to have you just give a little shout out about the session over here. I wanted to go back to the slide that you had about humans versus machines. Obviously, AI, generative AI, and all that stuff is the big thing that's going on for the last 2-3 years. Do you have any opinions or thoughts on that versus with how it's impacting test automation?
A lot of thoughts on that. It'll be a whole different talk. Yeah, I think that actually there's a lot to be won with AI and test automation. Test automation right now is really going under a revolution because of AI and about how AI can help us script faster, to do these consolidation checks faster. It's really exciting. So if you aren't read up on it now. There's a lot of great new developments going on in AI-assisted automation.
Perfect. If you wouldn't mind, our moderator is going to bring you up on full screen. And if you could give us a little testimonial on your experience here at Zappletech, and we'd really appreciate it.
Sure. So, yeah, that was the session on test automation and how you can make it tidy and clean from Zapple. I thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I hope that you all got a lot out of it. And thanks for all your support as well. And I look forward to learning more from the other presenters as we go on.
Great. Rick, it's been a real pleasure having you speak over here. We're definitely going to invite you back so we can get more into automation and how to optimize our processes. It's been a pleasure.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, everybody. It's me, Paul, back over here. We're kind of have our little 2-minute in between break between our next guest, Ezanne Grobler. Just kind of a reminder is that you can see us streaming live. You can ask questions, and that is on our LinkedIn and also on our site for on YouTube. So shoot them in. Ezanne is available here. We can have her answer questions and on her presentation. Let me tell you a little bit about Ezanne. She works with Qualiblaze, which is really cool. She's a co-founder of Qualiblaze. I get their name right. It's a testing and consulting and training company out of South Africa. She's been passionate about testing, 25 years in the industry, and also equally passionate about enabling and coaching. Ezanne, welcome to Zappletech. Thank you for coming. We're going to do a quick mic check on you. I think we're going to see if that can. I don't think we're hearing the mic coming through. So I'd say double check on the controls. There's a little button that says mic and mute. Tell me a little bit more, Ezanne. Let's see if we can hear what's going on. Still not getting anything. Ezanne, you can hear me? Yes. Okay, she can hear me. We can't hear you. Let's take a look at this. On the bottom setting, there's a settings, a little gear. If you click on that, there is the audio selection. It has a drop down. It might have multiple microphones that are available on that. Maybe select a different one. And as you're speaking into it, you should see the little green bar giving us little marks over there. Are you able to see that? Or possibly change the mic? No. What else can we do? Hopefully, maybe our moderator. Our moderator is saying check the microphone permissions in the browser. See if that's been denied. Let me see if I can find where the microphone permissions in the browser are located at. I'm looking at my side. It's under settings. Looking at settings, I just jumped to it, sync, customize, import bookmarks, and I'm trying to see, this is the point where an AI would come in and tell me exactly what I need to do to get this to work. So I believe Ezanne is going to drop off and come back in. Ezanne, are you able to hear me? That looks like it's a frozen frame, actually. This is what's cool about when you have live sessions, is that it gives you the challenges. So one other thing, just to remind you, as I said, I work for, do consulting for a company called Test Rigger. It's all plain English, and just introduced AI, which is really cool. You can just say, check the page contains a girl with a flower, and it'll go, yeah, I see a flower, I see a girl. Or even validate that you see the company logo, which is really super cool. One other book I want to mention to you, if you guys have available, is the Software Testing Strategies. This is by Matthew Huser. Matt is a good friend of mine. I always like to mention other people's books out there that are doing cool things and neat stuff, and trying not to bump into my camera as we do this. There is a lot of more cool automation stuff coming up in the next few months. We'll also have a couple other speakers. We do this every 2 months, roughly every month or every 2 months, and it is shared between me and Larry Goddard. As I mentioned at the beginning, me and Larry Goddard wrote a book about test automation, working with WebDriver IO. And I believe we're gonna start working on a version that is with other automation frameworks. Cypress was one that's out there. There's a few other new ones kind of floating around. So definitely take a look at those. We're still waiting to see if Ezanne comes back. I think she's doing maybe a computer reboot, which is what I would do on that. That's what everybody does when your audio and your microphone, your video is working, but your audio is not. It's just a simple restart. In fact, Right now, I can tell you on my Chrome browser up here, it says there's an error up there. I'm actually surprised that my audio is coming through and my video is working so well. And it would be cool if I could just go and take a swim in that virtual pool that's out there. Test automation thing is, so we're looking at some background stuff to see if we can get this taken care of. So we're working with our technical difficulties. We're going to get it taken care of. So let me see. Yeah, why don't we bring Rick back up online over here, and let's do some more Q&A. And there's Ezanne.
Oh,
There we
yes,
go.
can you hear me now?
We can hear you. It is working.
Yay! If all else fails in IT, restart the machine.
That is exactly what I was saying during the break. So that is fantastic. All right, so I did mention a couple of things. The company Qualiblaze that you work for, that you've been working for 20 to 25 years. Anything else you want to add to that before we get started?
I think that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk all the way from South Africa. I appreciate it thoroughly. Let me just share my screen, because definitely you don't want to just watch me talking and see some PowerPoint slides. Let's
And just a reminder to everybody that there is a Q&A session. In fact, I can see a guy named Ezra's over there giving some questions. I think I know Ezra's personally. So I'll turn it back over to you. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Paul. A very warm, I think it is afternoon wherever you are. It's almost evening here in South Africa, but it is summer, and so the sun is still shining here, even though it is 6 o'clock on my side. Thank you, guys. I'm going to talk today about testing metrics. I'm going to share a story, and hence why the title of my talk is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But before any further ado, a little bit more introduction. Paul already alluded to it. I've been 20 plus years in the IT industry, majority in the software quality assurance area. I'm absolutely passionate about the consulting side, but more so on learning and development and enablement and training and mentoring. I'm currently, as Qualiblaze, working at a client called IOCO. And the story that I'm sharing is stories based on IOCO, and hence why I decided to give them also the benefit of putting their brand out there as well. So IOCO is one of Africa's leading technology service providers and is listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. IOCO as a company covers the entire ITC value chain, and as a key technology partner, IOCO is a key technology partner for more than 5,000 enterprise customers, not just in South Africa, but in Africa as well as in EMEA, the Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So the services that IOCO has is infrastructure services, digital enablement, and as you guys can see, testing and quality assurance is part of the digital enablement pillar in IOCO. They also have connections in terms of the industrial ecosystem. But for me, the most important is, where do we fit in as software quality assurance? So what's on the agenda for today? I'm going to talk to you about testing metrics. We're just going to align originally in terms of testing metrics and reporting. And then I'm going to share a story in terms of a digital transformation project that we started becoming part of about early in 2017. As with any digital transformation program, or most of those big ones, the program is still running. We are still busy up to today with the digital transformation program. Then we also had a bad story, and this is where we actually were part of a software as a service delivery program, where again, we were the testing outsource partner for that project as well. I'm going to share with you lessons learned on both case studies. And then ultimately we're going to go to the good. And that's where I really want to focus on today. And that is uncovering meaningful metrics. So my aim is to literally share with you lessons learned from the past, but also how we as IOCO actually started unpacking and becoming a lot more effective and efficient in terms of our testing metrics. It's a journey. It's an ongoing journey. So I'll even share that with you. And then ultimately what we jump to conclusion in terms of our experience on the ugly project, experience on the bad project, and then why do we really want to focus on the good. We'll end up, if time permits, with question and answer. So as I already alluded to it, my title, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 2 major IT programs. The ugly is a multi-year transformation program. The bad is a software as a service delivery program. And the good is a blend of the theory, owning implementations, and industry insights. So let's just quickly do an alignment in terms of testing metrics and reporting. So Peter Drucker, which is very known as almost the father in modern management, said that if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And then Lord Kelvin, which is pretty known in Britain, he's a British scientist. He was very known for his work on temperature measurement. He said that you can't improve something if you can't measure it. Jenny Weinberg, which we all see, or most of us actually see as the father of testing, said that quality is valued to some persons or whatever someone finds valuable. And then for you guys there in the United States, James Bach and Michael Bolton doesn't need any introduction. They added to this by saying, who matters? And for me, this was actually the key aha moment in terms of testing metrics as well, is to understand who cares. But let's look at the other side of the coin. Don't forget to tell the story. We often focus so much, especially we as testers and in testing metrics, we focus on the numbers and we focus on the metrics, and we've got so many jargon in terms of different metrics that we want to thrown out there as part of our test reporting. But we forget sometimes the narrative. We forget about the story that sits behind it. And why is these stories important? It's important to really showcase the full picture of what is happening in the testing arena. So who are we reporting to? We should actually measure quality based on what's important to the people involved. And I think that was for me quite significantly a aha moment, was that no 2 stakeholder groups actually have the same definition of quality. They don't see quality in the same manner. However, we as testers so often actually portray the standard one-size-fits-all report into our stakeholders and expect that our test report needs to answer to their questions. So ultimately, we want to get into focus on your stakeholders, understand what their needs are regarding quality, and align ultimately your test metrics to their vocabulary. So let's recap. Typical ISTQB 101 or ISTQB Foundation is telling us the story about testing metrics. You've got process metrics. Post-process metrics actually aligns a little bit and give you more insight in terms of test management efficiency. It tells you about the defects detected. It tells you about the availability of your test environment, the efficiency of the test processes, and so forth. Product, on the other hand, is telling you quality. And what is the quality of the ecosystem? What's the quality of the application under test? It elaborates a little bit around risk coverage, code coverage, and again, defects, defect density, defects fixed, and mean time between failures are in that category. But project is vitally as important, and that is your business return on investment or your time to market. So your project metrics is necessary from a project exit criteria. They focus on test activity, especially on progress, percentage test cases executed, as well as how fast we could actually do all of that, which is your cadence. So let's look at our lessons that we've learned in terms of the digital transformation program. First of all, I need to set the scene. So in this transformation program, it was an exceptional complex ecosystem. It wasn't just one vendor and one development house. It was multiple vendors that delivered code in different manners. What is not on the screen, but what is important to note as well is in this multiple vendors, we also didn't follow a straight out one development methodology. The front end was driven with an agile approach. The middleware was in a sort of hybrid, and then the backend component 100% followed a waterfall approach. On top of that, our client, a big insurance company in South Africa, thought also it's best to outsource not just the testing, but outsource the project office as well, but keep user acceptance testing with themselves. So in-house user acceptance testing, they went out on a big tender, and IOCO was the lucky winners of the tender. We originally were given the responsibility of system integration testing, but there was a lack of a system integrator. There wasn't a one body that looked after system integration. And we as testing, because it was the first time that all of these different code drops got together, we became the system integrator as well and have suddenly the responsibility of the overall quality. So our initial focus, being the testing vendor, was a lot on product metrics. And we highlighted to the program the absence of unit and system testing from our different development vendors. The reality was that the project office wasn't actually as much interested in product metrics. For them, they were very much focused on project metrics, and time and budget was constantly what they wanted to know. So based on time and based on budget, they wanted to see testing progress. And we all know, as part of the testing arena, that the worse your product metrics are, the longer it will actually take to do things, because you log defects, you actually have the retesting, etc., that needs to happen as well. So we needed to shift our approach. We needed to start talking the language that the project office wanted us to convey, and we needed to give them that information as well. And as a result, because it wasn't upfront part of our objectives and strategy, we needed to export data from the test management tool, put it in Excel, pivot it, put it back into a PowerPoint, and test metrics and testing reporting took forever. So the challenges in terms of this as well is, if I can go back to my previous slide where I said that we focus on product metrics, we wanted to showcase that there was lack of unit testing, that quality gate actually failed us as part of an entrance criteria. But unfortunately, that actually created us versus them dynamics. And we've realized as we're going along, this is not going to work. We needed to find a better way to work together. So the first lesson that we've learned in order to help us to get to areas of improvement was we misunderstood stakeholders. We misunderstood stakeholder perspective. At that point in time, being the service delivery, testing service delivery lead on the program, I didn't for once actually realize the importance of stakeholder alignment and stakeholder management, and really spend time with our stakeholders and understood that, yes, their definition of quality and their expectation of testing is so vastly different from a different group of stakeholders. So as a result, these stakeholders didn't understand our language and we didn't understand their language. We didn't get together to actually get to a common ground situation. And we also then ultimately realized the alignment of the stakeholders, and absolutely development being our stakeholders, the different development vendors being also our stakeholders. Don't make them the enemy, make them your friend, was a huge lesson learned for us in terms of that program. If I bring you back to the BAT, which was a software as a service delivery. Now, again, so often we sit in situations where we do a software development lifecycle type of project, and we are the testing vendor from that perspective. But software as a service was quite a unique delivery program for us as well. So again, I start off with setting the scene. This time around, software as a service, the client, the South African client, was running this entire program from a business-led and from a business lens perspective instead of a technical understanding. So for the first time, testing was part of a business delivery instead of testing being so used to be part of this traditional software development life cycle. So that was a huge shift in terms of challenge. The client vendor dynamics. So here we didn't have a development vendor, but we had the software as a service vendor. And for the first time, this vendor was quite unfamiliar with the fact that their client could have a dedicated testing team. So the client, their client, our client as well, hired us as their testing partner, and we played a huge role then on behalf of them with the software as a service vendor. The mere fact that this vendor actually was so unfamiliar with having a dedicated testing team, that actually bring a lot of alignment challenges to the table as well. There was huge issues in terms of collaboration between the vendor as well as the testing professionals, which was us. And again, long and behold, there was a us and them that turned metrics into almost ammunition for this war. Lastly, there was testing challenges as well. We, as a result of the huge challenges that we had in terms of the software as a service vendor, what actually happened was that this software as a service vendor bought a total new company to become part of their end-to-end life cycle as well. So in actual fact, we sat with two different vendors. They needed to integrate. They didn't actually deliver the system as an integrated solution. And again, here we found ourselves that testing almost needed to play a system integrated role. On top of that was the fact that the company, the asset management company, which was the client, decided to keep the testing design and test execution part of their responsibility. So the subject matter experts within the asset management company were doing the design and execution. We as testing professionals were responsible for test management, defect management, and the overall quality. However, we didn't manage this team of SMEs. They didn't report into the test management org structure at all. So there were different variables on top of the fact that we had this complex situation. There were different variables that impacted our testing delivery as well. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there were poorly documented target operating model, lack of clearly defined requirements that actually added to the challenge of testing coverage. As a result of these SMEs that were doing the design and the execution, to really measure test traceability and link it to coverage was quite cumbersome. These guys didn't understand testing. They didn't understand the power of test traceability. And as a result, for us to do test management reporting, test coverage was almost impossible to measure. Having said that, is we had a fluid testing scope. So the poorly documented target operating model, as well as the requirements, continuous and split into a testing scope as well. There was, on top of that, weak adherence to agile principles. Remember, it was a business-led type of program, so they didn't understand the word agility or agile principles. And as a result, there were a lot of ad hoc delivery, that unplanned delivery that impacted release management. The test velocity was difficult to measure. Not only was defect management almost non-void from this software as a service company, they never actually worked, as I said, with a disciplined testing vendor, but there was slow and unplanned defect resolution that actually caused significant delays in testing and had a huge impact on test planning as well, over and above the fact that there wasn't proper release management and proper pipeline in order to really see how we're going to get our different code drops. The measurement of testing became cumbersome. The reporting effort became cumbersome. Again, we found ourselves in a situation where we needed to pivot continuously in terms of trying to align testing measurements and testing reporting into this world of continuous variable changes that were outside of our control. And again, we found ourselves in a situation where stakeholder knowledge was just not there. We sat with business-led type of program. We sit with a software as a service vendor that's not aligned to testing jargon or testing ways of work. And that again actually just realized that whenever we presented testing metrics and testing reporting, these guys just didn't understand what we tried to convey. Last but definitely not least is the tool that the company or both parties or the program decided to use wasn't testing friendly and couldn't really provide us with queries and ability to run queries against the database. And the effort again to pull the testing information out of this tool were really problematic. So the reality of the test reporting ended up that because of the different stakeholders, we ended up aligning this time to their needs, but we had test reporting that focused on defects, which was your product metrics. And then we had testing progress and test case results and execution velocity in a different manner and time frames, or not time frames, but different reports because of the different stakeholders. And we delivered these in isolation. That brought a lot of new challenges to the table. The people didn't understand the full picture. They didn't understand that product metrics have such a big impact on project metrics, have such a big impact on process metrics, etc. We lost the audience entirely in our engagement, and we needed to adjust. We needed to adjust to the factors that impacts testing, as per my previous slide, and also to adjust our methods on how do we do our reporting. So what was the lessons that we learned in both these case studies? Let's look at what we really did well and not just what we actually didn't do well. So at least time defect management, real-time defect management was good. Our key focus was effective defect management. It was something in our control. It was something that we know about. It was in our comfort zone, and we could actually focus on that. We had strategies around it. We could focus on the testing progress. We could adjust to those external constraints that we've identified, and we could use alternative methods and pivot our response to explain the test progress. That resulted in, and ultimately it was almost like the tail that waggles the dog, was that it ultimately did increase and improve the project flow, as well as the quality. And as a result, we started with faster defect detection. That resulted in higher product quality and ultimately more efficient defect management. Unfortunately, we did a lot of lessons learned on what we didn't do well. So, as I alluded already to it, stakeholder input, as well as the mentoring or the knowledge transfer or the enablement of our stakeholders wasn't necessary there. We didn't collaborate upfront with our stakeholders. We didn't map our test metrics to the stakeholder goals. And as a result, we couldn't drive the decisions through metrics data. Furthermore, because of not understanding the testing, the stakeholders, they also didn't understand testing metrics. And one thing that was vastly overestimated was the impact of logging defects. And every time you log a defect, you need to retest that failed test case, and you need to work in that estimation into your time as well. It's so often perceived that there's a to-do list, and you tick the to-do list, and you've got 100 test cases, and you can execute on the 100 test cases. But what the stakeholders didn't actually grasp was the fact that a failed test case needs time to do defect management and find root cause analysis, find the reason for that defect, fix that defect, send it back to testing, and actually have testing retest that defect, with the risk that maybe it didn't actually solve the problem, and that is a reopened defect as well. So that was totally underestimated in terms of a workout. On top of that, the necessity to actually increase test coverage as well, because we started with a lot more defects than what we originally anticipated. I think we anticipated a 30% failure rate. We ended up with almost an 80% failure rate. And as a result, you need to go back to your stakeholders and say the risk of the quality of your system that needs to go into production is so high that originally we thought we're going to test this, but we now need to increase our test coverage as well. And yeah, the fixing of the defects was totally unrealistic in terms of how quickly would the vendor be able to fix the defects. So enough in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's actually look at the good and uncovering meaningful metrics. So first of all, I would like to bring your attention to something that is probably known to all of you that's been in IT for long enough, is our good project management triangle, where you've got scope, you've got budget, and you've got time. And as one of these actually move in terms of weight, it actually have an impact on the other one, as well as the impact on quality. And when I went back to the principles of the project management triangle and how this actually worked, that helped us to get to a similar triangle, but in terms of testing metrics. So we alluded it, and I started the alignment with your process, your product, and your project metrics. ISTQB nowadays elaborate, and they talk about people metrics as well. But what we've actually realized is coverage should be a metrics on its own. Risk should be a metrics on its own. And ultimately, one needs to, again, go back to your stakeholders, not just to their needs, not just to their definition of quality, but also continuously do your surveys in terms of get an understanding and a feel of their confidence levels to deploy this system under test into production, or this product into the production environment. And I think once we actually started understanding your confidence metrics and get your stakeholders to actually get the aha moment in terms of the progress and the stand of testing, you don't actually have to be such a strong advocate in terms of maybe saying it's a high risk to go live or not. So let's look at those 7 dimensions as per my interconnectedness in terms of my testing metrics triangle. So we definitely agree that early stakeholder inputs shapes your testing metrics. We got to the realization that we've got different priorities and definitions. Definitely IT see the world with technical lens, where business see the world with a functional lens. And as a result, we needed to pivot in order to understand these different dimensions, understand these different definitions and requirements from our stakeholders. And that's ultimately where we got to our 7 key stakeholder dimensions. The first one, typical product, where you verify still your technical specs, validate your requirements, test the functionality, and have monitoring metrics around that. Your project, where you track your performance, you monitor it against exit criteria, you assess certain risk factors, and you account for the rework. So anything here related to the project triangle is pretty much your project metrics. Process, assess the testing efficiency, identify the bottlenecks in terms of environment downtimes, failures, defect resolution, retesting, regression, as I've alluded to the lessons learned from our two case studies. People, definitely skills of your resources, the speed of execution, the velocity in terms of that, alignment to the user expectations, as well as your stakeholders. Then we added to the 4 core dimensions, risk, and we moved risk to actually be your project risks, but also integrate that with your testing dimensions as being identified during your test plan. Proactive risk management, minimize the impact on project delivery, and ultimately enhance your quality assurance. Then the 6th dimension is coverage. And here we've actually also learned that so often we have traceability between requirements and test cases and have requirement coverage. But long and behold, we actually needed that white box testing coverage as well. And your code coverage needs to be filtered into your test metrics as well. And then ultimately, risk, how do we ensure that we've got test cases that ultimately cover the risk? And then, as I've already alluded to it, your confidence levels, measure throughout the project with team and stakeholder surveys. So what would be a good approach then in terms of testing metrics? And yeah, I was actually literally sitting with my team, and it was probably the birth of this presentation, was where I said to the one test manager, how do we prevent, again, that we get involved in a program and we, or lack of a better word, suck at doing test reporting? So, as you already could guess, is stakeholder engagement was a key thing for me. Define the testing objectives, marry those testing objectives with your stakeholder engagement, and ultimately select your metrics in consultation with your stakeholders. Make sure that you've got a proper matrix that address that. Create a conceptual framework and align on your concept definitions. Collect the data then, have proper tooling, have tooling that was set up in such a way, your processes in your tools been set up in such a way that it doesn't take forever to do your test reporting. Then storytelling, have effective communication and reporting, and then ultimately do continuous improvement and adjustment. And that ultimately will help you to define your test metrics, involve your stakeholders, but continuously improve on your testing practices as well. We also actually realized that, as with any good thing, there's a metrics evolution as well. So ultimately, testing 101 was your basic metrics, your 3 Ps, your project, your product, and your process. But understand the organizational culture and mentor and educate. That's where you start. Then you enhance, you accelerate, you make it better. You increase it to maybe all 7 the dimensions. You make sure that your metric infrastructure is in place so that you can do data analytics. You can do some diagnostics. You actually know who cares. You know how to fix the problems. You actually gain insight. And ultimately, you mobilize and you get people into action. But I heard the question from Paul earlier in terms of AI, and absolutely, in metrics, this is also where we're going with innovate and transform. You need to have a proper reporting framework, but then on top of it, you need to be able then to benefit from machine learning, benefit from AI, and start actually with predictive analytics. I always say that defect management is the heartbeat of testing, but that actually is also where such a pool of data is sitting there that if you start diagnostics on this pool of data and do lessons learned with these data, you can start predicting as to where the next defect might actually appear. So I'm just going to give you some insights in terms of our principles that we've identified for our framework. The first one is gather, analyze, and compare data from various sources. So because we're a consulting company, it so often means that with this vendor, we actually worked on Azure DevOps. On this vendor, we work with Jira. On this vendor, we work with Quality Center and ALM as part of they used to call HP OpenText. And we needed to find a framework that whatever tool we actually use, we can gather that information and start comparing the data from various sources. Assess the progress, intermediate measurement, and identify potential issues. Analyze the data to identify trends and insights and communicate your findings. Metrics provide clear and impactful insights. That is absolutely important, that you don't just gather metrics because the textbooks are saying, oh, these are good metrics that you can actually use. Understand why you want that and that it is impactful and insight and give insight. Enable the customers to take right action based on the metrics. They need to understand your metrics and they need to use your metrics as a live source of enablement to give them that ability to make decisions. You need to be able to customize your views. You constantly need to be able to pivot because you've got different stakeholders and they actually want to see different things. That was an important thing as well. And then ultimately unlock this framework for you to get to predictive analysis. Quality over quantity. Instead of having a list as long as my arm in terms of defects or testing metrics, is identify those that's really making a difference and have impact insights, because too much information is as good as no information. We also identified as part of our framework objectives, and there's 12 objectives that we've identified that we need to align to. Innovative insights. Your testing metrics needs to be like a treasure map. It needs to lead to insights and to hidden solutions. Being able to pivot, be able to have executive insights, but also the detailed insights. Tailor those insights because one size doesn't fit all. Your ability to pivot, I've already alluded to that. Then this was an interesting one, is your testing metrics needs to be like a superhero. It needs to have the superhero effect and acts as a superhero, ready to swoop in and save the day when challenges arise. Metrics is important, so what get measured is what matters, but not just from a metrics perspective, but also from who you're actually reporting to. Quality over quantity, we already mentioned that. Scalable solutions, so integrate seamlessly, integrate into different tools. So our framework is almost like an ERP, a executive report program that actually sit on top of different databases. Early risk detection, needless to say, be able to do the storytelling, have an efficiency boost, and ultimately have a balanced reporting. Interconnectedness of the 7 dimensions. Understand that the one dimension will have an impact on the other dimension, and bring those stories together and bring that interconnectedness together for your stakeholders. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion ultimately is prioritize the alignment with stakeholders. Start there. Don't do this as an afterthought, but start with your alignment with your stakeholders. Understand their KPIs. Understand what do they want to get out of the program. What do they want to get out of testing? Communicate those metrics efficiently. Align them to the discussion and the jargon of your stakeholders. But don't forget about storytelling. Connect those dots for your stakeholders. Don't actually get to the point of a dashboard can actually tell the story, and that you expect that your stakeholders can actually see the storytelling. That narrative remains extremely important. Then a very important one for us was collaborate with your different partners and vendors. Don't make them your enemy. Don't go to that years old of history in terms of the wall that was between testing and development. Break down that wall, build collaboration, build alliances amongst them, and then foster collective learning. Absolutely learn from your mistakes. Try to avoid the common mistakes and learn from your peers, and embrace continuous improvement. You're not done when you actually put all of this in place. Strive really towards improving continuously. So the art and science of metrics. Metrics are indispensable. Metrics are absolutely there, but it needs to be used in the right manner. Qualitative measure and quantitative measure and qualitative collaboration. They encompass both the qualitative side, the numbers and the cold metrics, with the narrative, the qualitative collaboration, the narrative, the storytelling, the connecting the dots for your stakeholders. Testing metrics is absolutely an art and a science. From an art perspective, the interpretation, the contextualization of the data, the insights that you get from it to actually adapt to your project goals, but also the science, following the established methodologies and framework, relying on scientific principles of data and communication. And then lastly, strive towards informed decision making and continuous improvement in project performance and quality. Oh, and that was the last one. The ever-evolving testing metrics. There is no fixed recipe. There's no one-size-fits-all. And what we've learned as a consulting company is not on 2 programs your testing metrics will actually mean the same and will be the same, because your stakeholders differ, because the objective of the program differ. And that ultimately is the drive to how you would actually do your test reporting and how you will deliver. And that is me. Any questions?
Well, let's I'm back on screen. I'm looking here and I actually don't see any questions that are coming out, but I did want to talk a little bit about some of the most important thing that you brought up there is the storytelling. I will tell you, Ezanne, I am guilty of pointing at the dashboard and saying, isn't that great? Isn't that what, do you see what's happening? And not giving a really compelling story. And they're like, yeah, well, who cares? How's it saving money? Where's the ROI?
Yeah.
I will I will tell you, share with you a little story that did work out pretty well. This is one of the first year I was working in automation. I've been doing this for 24 years. In my first year in it, we used automation. We found a bug, but the developers said, "Oh, it's the automation tool that's causing that to occur." And the second time I found a bug, they also said it's the automation tool, not us. But they had figured out the first time, yeah, it was a problem on their side. And then we found the third time. I'll tell you that our lead developer had already had heard in the back, I found something, and they're like, some guy says, "Oh, it's that automation tool." And I said, "Well, you can sit here and try and find it." He sat there and tried to look for the tool. I said, "I assure you that the automation tool is installed on the computer behind me, not this one. I'm just having you do it manually," which is a pretty compelling story to him. But at the point, the developer, the lead developer, who in my mind just was strikingly similar to Jim Carrey, he just comes up to me and he's like, "Don't worry. He's the new guy. If you found something, I'm sure it's on our side." I'm like, "Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the vote of confidence on that." And continuing, we found 7 problems that we listed that would have been showstoppers, and mostly in my from that experience, from my point was I was able to link that to loss of money. You're having this problem, you lose a customer, you lose money, and since they were selling X-ray machines, it was millions of dollars that they were potentially losing. So the story there was, hey, if this guy finds this stuff, I liked what you said about because of all that, we definitely worked on breaking down that wall between the developers and the testers. We weren't throwing stuff over the wall anymore. Anything you want to do a little bit more focus on for? I mean, anything we can talk about for like tearing down a wall? How do you address it if you see that with a client and they're like, "Hey, the developers and the QA people aren't talking to each other"?
Yeah.
How do you bring that up?
I think for me, one of the key lessons learned is the fact that developers are a stakeholder of testing, and you need to address them and collaborate with them equally as what you would do with your business stakeholders, and they also part of your clientele, if I can almost put it like that. So for us, it was this initial thing of getting into a program and do active stakeholder management, but identify your key stakeholders and sit with them one-on-one and get from them what you want from testing. What do you hate from testing? What would you like to know from testing? What is your needs from that? And bring that to the table and know that upfront. If you get their buy-in almost upfront and almost sign a contract with them in a partnership agreement, that already is 50% won. And then once you start telling the bad stories, because I mean, that's what we do in testing, we convey problems, but then they actually see the benefit of it instead of actually thinking that you're the enemy.
Yeah, I've always looked at it as in my field, I want to improve the product, but at the same time, I'm trying not to point out that the developers, their project is their baby, and I'm the guy who comes up and says, "Whoa, yeah, you got an ugly baby there," and they're like, "No, don't say it that way. Put it in a do it in the best positive way to do that." This is a great thing. I'm a great presentation. I loved everything that you brought up. It struck very much a chord with everything that I've been doing for the last 20 years. Hang on, we actually have a question came over here. Let's see. Can you recommend current automation tools for people who are not developer oriented, but are still test oriented? That comes from William Frazier.
Yes, that's actually an interesting question, and not that I'm going to give myself out as an automation expert, but I've listened to Rick's presentation just before me, and it is the beauty and the power of AI. So AI augmented tools are popping up everywhere. They like popping up like mushrooms. Again, we as a company started investigating that, William, and there is a lot of tools out there that is low code, no code, but AI augmented. And if you literally can just Google that, or start actually putting that lately into a large language model and ask for that. There's so many tools out there. We, for instance, started with, we in collaboration with a company which is still in beta mode, but they literally take a spec, they write test cases from the spec, their AI enablement, and then those test cases, they translate into playwright scripts, and then ultimately that playwright scripts goes into playwright. So you don't have to be an expert in playwright. Playwright is definitely one of the automation tools of choice, but because you've got the AI augmented tools that actually help the non-developer orientated or the less technical resources to actually be able to start utilizing that and accelerate your entire testing lifecycle with that.
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, as I said, the company I've been working with for a couple of years now, Test Rigger, is their tagline is testing from the manual tester's perspective. It's almost, I would like, it's almost no code. I'd say 90% of what you want to do can be done just by saying click, quote, add to cart, and you're there. There is a little bit of JavaScript that you can put in to take care of anything the developers haven't gotten to yet. But it's a really cool tool for if you don't want to learn JavaScript, if you don't want to learn Ruby or any of that stuff. It is a nice little thing. TestRigger.com out there. And it actually implements a lot of the ideas we also had from Rick this morning, where he was talking about, or earlier, what he was talking about, the modularity. Just don't repeat stuff. That's all in there. And it also has all the AI stuff where you could just grab text like you were just describing, and put it in it's basically a word format. It's not the drop down, click, all that stuff. It's just stick it in there and let the AI figure out what it needs to do.
Yes.
Enough of me plugging that. There's lots of tools out there. William, please go look them all up. And LeapWorks is also a very good tool for people who are visually good at seeing processes, but aren't technically inclined. I have to give a shout out to Rick, who was also bringing that point up. And thank you, Rick, on that, doing some shout outs. We're just about at the end of our time over here. I want to thank everyone who asked questions, and I want to thank you both, Rick, Tracy, and also Ezanne Grobler. Please check out her company out there, the Qualiblaze, for joining us. And if you wouldn't mind, as we wrap up here, Ezanne, can I ask you if we could have our moderator put you on full screen and give us some nice words about Zappletech in the session?
Absolutely.
Cool. Take it away.
I would just like to really say thank you so much to Zappletech. I think the power of LinkedIn, I didn't even know about you as a company. I didn't know about you as a meetup, but I was invited. I could actually go and read up on it. And sitting in South Africa, being able to attend a meetup with you guys and share my story was a beautiful experience, and I'm honored to be part of it. Thank you.
Great. Fantastic. Again, Ezanne, thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely have you back on to share more information. We do have this as a recording on YouTube, so if you missed all of this, you can check it out and catch all of the information over there. I believe I'm actually going to be the host on the next one coming up, or possibly Larry Goddard will be back. And I guess with that, I'm going to give it a wrap up. Everybody, have yourself a great day. keep testing, keep showing the ROI, keep showing those great metrics, and join us at our next time.
Thank you.
Have yourself. Have a great time. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.